Miami Heat to get started for the NBA Finals. Game 1 coming.
To not just property, but also life. And that's generally the case. But for Ian, that was the big thing that came out of this hurricane. So let's talk about storm surge and what it is. So again, this is incredibly deadly and dangerous. And this is why when you're asked to evacuate, you should pay attention. So if you're new to areas in Florida, know your evacuation zones, because oftentimes it's a matter of going just tens of miles, not hundreds, and jumping on a plane. Storm surge, what is it? Average high tide. We're looking at it. It's at a good level. When we talk about storm surge threat, you're talking about the level above normal high tide. So you're talking anywhere from maybe a couple of feet to several feet. And so when you look at that strong onshore wind, that is what's continuing to push this water into the coastline, onto the beaches, and eventually into neighborhoods, inundating homes, taking over cars, and really just presenting a huge threat, again, to not just property, but your life. That water will continue to rise until we start to see the winds really start to ease back and movement within that, in this case, and with Hurricane Ian, when we saw the hurricane actually shift further inland. You talk about Fort Myers, we had inundation here. We had storm surge at about 14 feet, and we all know that the huge mark that it left on
And we're tracking what a busy start to the season it's been so far. Of course, today is day 1, and we have Tropical Depression 2. This is where we see some organization with this storm, winds at 35 miles per hour. It's pivoting up to the north just slightly, but it's moving so slow. What's going to happen? This system hanging out, the low pressure hanging over this spot. Yes, temperatures are slightly warmer than the seasonal average, but there is a pocket right here in this region where sea surface temperatures are slightly below average. That would take away from the warm core of this storm, and that would allow this system to suppress. But we really don't even need that. We will see wind shear that will tear this system apart. Right now, we're seeing winds around close to the center, as close as possible in terms of the buoys that we're estimating, 31 miles per hour. So below that tropical storm strength by around 8 miles per hour, but it will continue to intensify over the next 24, maybe even close to 36 hours. Beyond that time frame, as it moves off to the south, that is moving into an area that is less favorable for development. I would say for us here, it's more favorable because then we see lower impacts in terms of how strong this system will be, even though with some organization pull away some of the rain from Florida. So even a little bit of organization looks to be a good thing. You'll notice the general consensus moving south and then pivoting back up to the north. Marissa.
All right, and we're going to take it a little bit further to the north now. A live look into Philadelphia, 87 degrees, 87 at 6:30 Eastern time. So Philadelphia, a nice hot day, the city of brotherly love, getting that early taste of summer as high temperatures there are soaring 10 to 20 degrees above average. But the heat, it's not going to stick around for long, so make sure you enjoy it. Fox Weather's Katie Byrne was in Philly today with a look at how folks there are soaking in the sun.
The temps are climbing, and it's not just today. They'll be climbing on Friday, too, as a lot of people taking their workouts outdoors.
The sweat, drop some of the pounds. We're going to make it all work together.
Runners, bikers, rollerbladers, you name it, they're out here. Temps are about 10 degrees above average in Philly, and it's going to get hotter.
Bring the shorts out. Get the shorts, get the tank top, lighten up.
People in upstate New York, New Hampshire, and northern Pennsylvania could be feeling record-breaking heat Thursday. Friday, the heat is more widespread, expanding to reach us here in Philly. Along Kelly Drive, a lot of people have water in their hands. Patrick's a runner. He ran a half marathon today. He says he runs all the time, but still, running in warm weather like this is rough.
I mean, usually when I run a long distance, I just bring water regardless because I know I'm gonna need it at some point. And it was definitely I finished my water for one of the first times ever.
According to the National Weather Service, Philly just had its driest May on record. We got about 1/4 of an inch of rain. We usually get more than 3 inches of rain. We'll have to see what June brings after this hot start. In Philadelphia, Katie Byrne, Fox Weather.
The 2023 Atlantic hurricane season is starting off with a bang. We have a disturbance that continues to brew in the Gulf. That is the first tropical depression of the season. Now, will it become the first named storm? This would be Tropical Storm Arlene. Still some questions. Well, we have the details and the forecast when Fox Weather comes right back.
Every storm is different, and how they react or how you react to it should not be different. You should react to every storm the same.
While this is the worst storm to ever hit our area, it's been the best recovery.
Complacency is something we want to avoid. It can be contagious at times. And for those who have actually gone through these storms and maybe met hurricanes without consequence, it's a new season.
Fox Weather is your hurricane headquarters. We've had live coverage all day long from the Sunshine State as the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season is here.
Yeah, and we've already launched off into an active start as the National Hurricane Center declares Tropical Depression 2 in the northeastern Gulf of Mexico. We, of course, have the latest on the disturbance and the impact it will have on Florida as a state deals with really rounds of rain and gusty winds.
And we're looking back on seasons past, diving into what we can learn moving forward.
All right, Florida, as you know, continues its road to recovery from one of the worst hurricanes in the state's history. So we're going to be breaking down the recovery efforts, but also what we're looking ahead to as we now launch into this brand new season.
Right. We have to pivot from looking back, which we still will do, to now looking forward into the new season. Welcome into Fox Weather. I'm Bridget Mahoney.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Marissa Torres. It's been a very busy afternoon. In fact, I mean, throughout the day, we've seen updates come in from the National Hurricane Center. Of course, the last update really elevating it a little bit into an actual tropical depression.
Tropical Depression 2. Now, not a tropical storm strength, although although we do think it has pretty good odds at strengthening to our first official name storm of the season. The season, of course, only a few hours old, but we are busy tracking this disturbance. You'll notice Tropical Depression 2 with those winds at 35 miles per hour. Those are within the closest to the core of the storm where, yes, we have this low of circulation. So, you know, you may see some gusty winds farther up to the north. You know, we've seen severe thunderstorm warnings in play. One of them for Tampa, not closely related to this. It's well off to the west of Tampa, but we're still seeing some onshore flow that's been developing some of these storms across the western half of Florida. Eventually, this moves south. As it moves south, I think it falls apart because of the wind shear. We do have above seasonal sea surface temperatures close to this vicinity and also south. That would prove to allow this storm to strengthen. But just as we have one thing that adds to the storm, we also have another thing that takes away from the storm. In this case, the big detractor of this storm is going to be the wind shear that we see. The low breaks away from the quieter wind shear and heads into a very hostile atmosphere as you see these winds cutting from the west, diving off to, I would say, generally speaking, the south. So you'll notice the track. The good consensus is that it's moving off to the south, close to Cuba, eventually over Cuba. We're seeing pretty good model arrangement with this system. It will eventually track up to the northeast, and you'll notice close to Miami. Now, we think how long this is out. You'll notice our time stamp here, Tuesday, 6 o'clock. So plenty of time for this track to change, Marissa, but what we know, it's going to be moving south over the next few days, and we continue to watch it. Marissa.
That's the only thing we can really do at this point, continue to watch and educate and inform everybody. If you're in Florida, of course, you could be dealing with some of those side effects, and we'll break down a little bit further what it could mean as we navigate the next several days. But in case it wasn't already painfully obvious, it is the first day of the Atlantic hurricane season. So we do want to focus on what this season could hold as we continue into the next several months. As you know, it goes June 1st to November 30th, and we continue to update and watch some of those forecasts coming in from CSU, Colorado State University, as well as NOAA. Now, CSU, they updated theirs, and that update to the forecast came out earlier this morning, really. And you can see now named storms 15 with that little asterisk. I'll explain that in a moment, but it does have to do with that January storm that we had. They're now forecasting 7 hurricanes, which is really in line with NOAA that said 5 to 9 hurricanes, so giving that range there. And you're noticing 1 to 4, potentially Category 3, which would be major hurricanes that we could see from NOAA, and CSU saying 3. That is pretty much on target with an average season, but whether this says below, whether it says above, we all know it just takes one storm, especially when you talk about one like Hurricane Ian, that can really have devastating impacts and change the lives of so many forever. So we just want you to be prepared. Now, that asterisk had to do with this unnamed subtropical storm that we had out in January out in the northern Atlantic. So that ended up taking on tropical characteristics. It was later decided that it was subtropical. And what you're looking at here is the El Nino effect. Why is this important when we forecast the season? Because this is going to be one of the big players and variables in terms of how active the season is. You have warmer water in the equatorial Pacific, and the result of that means more hostile upper-level winds. But the strength of the El Nino will also play a role. It's all these finite details in terms of how much activity we could see. So the stronger the El Nino, well, the more suppressed that activity in the Atlantic basin could be. So when you talk about El Nino, you're looking at the equatorial Pacific again and some of those warmer waters, as you can see here. And you're looking at the question of how warm will it get? How strong will it be? And Bridget, a lot of things to take into account, but we're going to be here to help everybody get through it.
Yeah, some things add to the season, some things take away. But what we're seeing added to Florida right now is rain. We see it's the rainy season after all. Sarasota, Florida, raindrops there on the camera. Miami, you've seen some sun, some late day sunshine. Fort Myers, it's been nice and sunny all day long. That's where Amy Freeze and Robert Ray, they joined us live earlier today on Weather Command, giving us some insight into the season and, of course, looking back on Hurricane Ian. We look at Tampa, Florida. This is where you'll notice temperatures cool cooler than what we're seeing surrounding because of the rain-cooled atmosphere that we're seeing. You'll notice how much rain we've seen over the last hour to 2 hours, 1.73 inches, so 1 3/4 inches because of this storm that's been almost stalled out. It's not moving all that much. You'll notice a wavering slightly off to the east, but barely so. The camera in the position where we've seen some of the heaviest of the showers. Downtown Tampa, it looks like you're dealing with some light showers off to the west. St. Pete Beach, maybe not as much rain for you. You look towards St. Petersburg over the last 6 hours. Our radar estimated showing a dry pocket for you. This is kind of Florida. If you could summarize Florida, this is it. You see dry time in St. Pete. Meanwhile, you had a mile to the north, 3.1 inches. Farther up to the north, Lutz, 3.1 inches, 2.6 farther north of there. So it's just hyper localized. One neighborhood, you see the rain, which gives you the drought relief. Another neighborhood, maybe not so lucky. We look at the storm moving off West Palm Beach, but still a few more storms working in from the west. We have the flood watches in effect from West Palm Beach off to the south, including Homestead. So we watch for that. Fox model shows us how active it's going to be over the next 24 hours. Although tomorrow morning you get a break, tomorrow afternoon, business as usual with more storms in the forecast. And those who survived, like in Hurricane Ian, are often some of the stories that are remembered. One story, a family forced to swim out of their home carrying their child to safety. Fox Weather's Robert Ray checked back in with Charlie's parents to see how recovery is going for them.
Whee! Whee!
What are you doing? Do you see the trees?
Baby Charlie, turning 1 year old next month, and a long life ahead of him, all because of his parents' heroic actions as Hurricane Ian ravaged their neighborhood near Fort Myers.
It was really windy at first. First, the roof shingles started flying off our house. Our lanai actually ripped off, flew over the house, and then the water started coming in. It went from about 1 inch to, almost over our heads in about 20 minutes. We originally had gone up to the attic, but we weren't sure how high the water was going to go. So we eventually took Charlie, put him in a plastic bin that was storing our Christmas decorations, and the cat as well in a separate bin, and we swam out our front door and kind of floated down our road, drifting.
Your instincts kick in, you assess what's around you, and we saw the bin, we knew it would float in water. Obviously not knowing kind of at the time how fast the water was going, but you just kind of do what I've never held on to something as tight as I could, so I honestly don't like thinking about it a whole lot because but
it was a lot.
It's a lot, that goes through your mind.
Good job.
By the time they floated down their neighborhood streets in strong currents and landed on high ground, they knew they had made it out. Listen to Callie's account moments after.
Not sure how long until we can get out of here, but it does look like the water is starting to recede. These steps were underwater, they're not anymore. So I do think it's going out. But rest in peace, house. Definitely gone. Love you guys, love everybody. Thank you for all the prayers. It's been pretty scary, but we're okay. Thanks to the fabulous neighbors who literally saved our lives.
Then you come back to today and thankfully it turned out the way it did. But
You just never knew in that time. We didn't know where we were floating to. We didn't know where we could have been. I mean, it could have gone completely differently.
8 months later, they have been forced to move twice, now living in Chad's mother's apartment. They are in litigation with insurance as their home that they escaped sits idle in the Florida heat and rains.
It's still very emotional. Every time we do go back to that house, I get very anxious and I don't like thinking about it. So for me, moving forward is just right now not thinking about it and hoping that it'll be easier once it's settled, when we can never have to look back at it again, just have that closure of being done with this process, because it's just not fun to think about.
And that was Robert Ray reporting there. And we want to talk about Mike Yost, another Hurricane Ian survivor. The Florida resident lost his house, his business, and his two best friends when Ian unleashed its fury on the Sunshine State. Fox News multimedia reporter Caroline Elliott spoke with Mike as Florida gears up for another season.
When you hear Mike Yost's story, you know, you really just feel for the guy. But really, that's the story that you're hearing over and over again from people here. You know, I first met Mike Yost maybe 2 or 3 days after the hurricane had passed. And at that time, officials weren't even allowing a lot of people on the island because they were still focused on search and rescue recovery. But since then, we do know the hurricane, or the island rather, has made a recovery, but still far away to go.
The small town of Fort Myers Beach is getting ready for another hurricane season.
You kind of lost time in the middle, so it's hard to say how long.
But for some locals on the island, it feels like the last hurricane season never ended.
It's a hurricane every day you come here. You look around and go, wow, hurricane hit here.
On September 28th, 2022, Mike Yost lost nearly everything. His house, his business, and his two best friends that didn't survive the storm surge.
We still have our lives, but two of my best friends on the beach died.
As the new hurricane season begins, we met him in the same place it started, where the trauma has settled in for many locals.
We had a decent storm a few weeks ago, and the walls were shaking a little, and it was getting pretty bad, and you got that sort of, I guess they call it PTSD sort of thing, where you're like, oh my God, you know, here it comes again.
For some, recovery has been slow.
My personal rebuild has not happened yet. So it's, you know, I'm trying to do different things. Like I know a lot of us that were business owners had to go out and get real jobs, you know, and actually work for somebody else and that kind of stuff. And we're trying to do whatever we can to get by.
As cleanup continues, locals are starting out this hurricane season with a harsh reality check.
No, I won't stay for a tropical storm in a trailer anymore, because I've seen what can happen.
And one sign of hope for many people here is that the National Weather Service is predicting a normal hurricane season this year. Back to you.
Just tragic, but there's a story of resilience there in Florida. Fox News multimedia reporter Caroline Elliott in Fort Myers Beach, Florida. Caroline, thank you for that report.
All right, and from Florida into the central southern plains, we want to talk about the storm risk as we head into tonight. Severe thunderstorms have been really a constant nuisance, and tonight, no different. We do have some concerns for flash flooding. You can see this video out of Amarillo, Texas. This showing you some of the flooding that occurred after some storms pushed through. So last night we were watching this threat, and yet again into tonight. Now you're noticing for the severe thunderstorm watch in terms of some of the communities that we have within that, not Amarillo, but you do have Lubbock and then just to the north of Midland and almost in towards Abilene, but not quite there. So till 10 o'clock Central Time, portions of New Mexico, really just a sliver of New Mexico included within that. So the wind gust potential, but also some large hail that could be about 2.5 inches in diameter, which is comparable to the size of a tennis ball. So you'd want to make sure that you're putting that car away so it doesn't get damaged, and anything else that could get damaged. You especially don't want to drive in it. So a couple of threats that are on the ground. So where you have the flash flood concerns south of Lubbock, west of Abilene there, at least the falling rain has moved away, but there still could be some flooding.
If you've driven down Chat Holly Road, you've probably seen a display of patriotic merchandise with Old Glory flying high. One South Walton High School freshman.
I do it to show more support for America, and I don't
some of these storms, some of them potentially intensifying as we continue into tonight. And you can see the movement from west to east yet again over the panhandles of Texas, Oklahoma until central Oklahoma. Some of these could bring quite a bit of heavy rain. So that's what we're watching into tonight. As I said, it's been a weekly nuisance at this point of seeing these very scattered, isolated, severe storms. And yet again, tomorrow, we're under similar threats. In fact, we have that upgraded, now very likely threat from Lubbock down in through Midland, but some of the same areas. Amarillo, I just showed you some of the flooding there. You could see more flood potential in many of these areas tomorrow, as we could take on another couple of inches at the least.
And it's time now for the special hurricane edition of Sunset Strip, where we highlight some incredible sunset photos. This one comes from the hurricane hunters on the final sunset of the 2022 hurricane season.
All right, and if you've captured a great, beautiful sunset and you want to share it, well, do us a favor, email it to our team, weather@fox.com. You can also tag us on social media. Very easy to do. Just do @FoxWeather. We're going to have much more Fox Weather across America coming up next.
And we're back now on Fox Weather as we continue to track Tropical Depression 2. These winds up to 35 miles per hour. Organization is increasing as of now within this system, although the opposite will happen over the next 48 hours and beyond. That's once this storm pivots off to the south. You may say, it's moving off to the west-northwest right now. How is it going to pivot south? Well, eventually we'll see the low wedge away from the calmer wind shear that we have right now, and it's going to work into an atmosphere that is going to drive it off to the south. And as it does so, it will weaken. So that overall is a good thing. We continue to track Tropical Depression 2 with those winds moving off to the west at 2 miles per hour. So we are going to continue to track this very closely, and that's where we have the possibility of more rain moving in. So we watch that very closely. Sam, if you could help me advance my graphics, I forgot my clicker. You'll notice it pivoting off to the south down to 35 miles per hour over the next couple of days, and you'll notice that there we continue to watch it eventually make its way towards Cuba, and that's where it eventually, as it's weaker there, it's going to lift back up to the northeast, and that's where we have the possibility of this system to still bring rain to Miami. So we're going to continue to track this. And of course, Fort Myers is where we've seen the devastation of Hurricane Ian. That's where, they saw devastation last year, and hurricane season, it's among us. So earlier on Weather Command, Amy Freeze and Robert Ray sat down with Fort Myers Mayor Kevin Anderson on the recovery efforts.
Here, Fort Myers Beach. We've also got the city of the same name, but they're different, still the same, especially when you look at the location. We're going to bring in the city of Fort Myers Mayor Kevin Anderson. He's going to join us here. Welcome to the beach, Mayor. Not a far trip for you. You're a little farther from the ocean, but you have a threat of your own with the river coming in. Fox Weather's Robert Ray here. He was actually right there in the city with you as the surge came in. Let's go back to that time period. What were your concerns as Ian came in?
Well, obviously the flooding. While we're not right here on the Gulf and we didn't have the surge that the Gulf and the Barrier Islands and the beaches had, we did have the river, and we had about 4.5 feet come in from the river. So flooding was a real concern.
Yeah, big time. And Mayor, by the way, good to meet you. Robert Ray, thanks for being with us. I will say, my team, my photographer and I retreated from here at about 8:45 a.m. on September 28th, knowing what was about to occur. When we got to your city of Fort Myers, 10 plus miles away, we found a parking garage, and we watched the deterioration as Ian came in. And then, as you stated, in the downtown area where many of those restaurants are, the water from the river began to come in, and the boats, the vessels unraveling. It was quite dangerous and very unnerving at that point. Where were you during that?
I was in a second-story condo at First and Henry in the heart of downtown, 3 blocks from the river. I got to watch the water come in, got up to about the top of a FedEx collection box. Knowing what downtown was 30, 40 years ago and watching it flood, really was concerning. Would we lose downtown? And we couldn't afford to go backwards.
I was going to ask you about the river, Caloosahatchee River?
Caloosahatchee.
Caloosahatchee, okay. Does it have a nickname, by the way? Just for future?
Caloosahatchee.
Caloosahatchee, okay, that's the nickname.
Not the hooch,
yeah,
like in Georgia.
Okay, I was just checking. I was just checking for the shortcut. As you looked at those threats, what were some of the takeaways, that you learned? Because it's not as bad as the beach, but still was a threat. You had homes and businesses that were lost.
So there's 3 things I like to stress to people. 1, prepare and plan so you don't have to panic. All right? Understand that the most predictable thing about a hurricane is that it is unpredictable. So if we're in the cone, if we're being threatened, react like we're going to take a major hit. And then the other thing is, know that while you can hide from the wind, you've got to run from the water.
Yeah, big time. And not to mention, over 7,200 vessels, yachts and boats up and down southwest Florida, destroyed and piled on each other. And I'll never forget the morning after Ian showing up right near downtown and looking at those vessels on top of each other, and the sounds of the alarms and the smell of fuel. What an amazing pickup since. I don't know how you guys got all those out of there.
While this is the worst storm to ever hit our area, it's been the best recovery. And that comes from government plans. We weren't caught off guard. You can't stop the water from coming in. All you can do is prepare and then be able to react and start the recovery. And we've had a really great recovery.
Terrific leadership. We appreciate you taking some time. City of Fort Myers Mayor Kevin Anderson, thanks for being with us.
All right, and there are many reasons to evacuate from an incoming hurricane, right? But some people ignore that call and attempt to weather the storm. In fact, a new AAA study shows that 1 in 4 Floridians would choose to ignore evacuation orders. Fox 13 Tampa spoke with Hillsborough Emergency Management Operations, breaking down why people choose to stay.
It's a question that even has emergency officials scratching their heads. If you're warned to evacuate during a storm, why would you stay?
Yeah, that's something that we are constantly trying to assess and figure out so we can tailor our messaging towards those people.
They speculate that one reason may be complacency.
this hasn't happened, or they've warned us about this before and it hasn't come, it's then turned, so it's not going to be too bad. Or even the comparison to prior storms when they've decided to ride it out and they've seen the impacts and think that that's something that they can deal with and survive.
Another could be a lack of understanding.
What does it mean when we tell somebody to expect up to 15 feet of storm surge? What does that impact look like? What does, up to 200-mile-per-hour winds look like, and what does that do to your property? It's not something I think that a lot of people are familiar with, and it's hard to imagine those things if you haven't seen it in real life, and sometimes even images of what they see on the news don't really equate to really what that looks like in person.
The older population may not be aware of the resources that are available right at their fingertips.
Grandmother, grandfather, they may not be very tech savvy. They may not understand where they can go to learn the information that they need to know. So help them out, right? Sit next to them, show them on your phone or your computer where they can go to look up their evacuation zone so they know what that is. Explain to them what that means.
Some may stay because of their pets or if they have special needs.
We have 8 general population shelters available here in Hillsborough County, all of which that are pet friendly. And then our special needs shelters as well. We have a total of 6 of those here in the county. Each one of those are also pet friendly. And so there are plenty of areas where if a shelter is what their plan is, that they're able to bring the pet with them. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that the pet is going to be with them in the same location. They're going to be in a separate area of the shelter that's specific for the pets. But again, it's better than staying at their home and being unsafe.
So if you get that order to evacuate,
you want to run from the water. So if you are in any of those evacuation zones that local officials are calling to evacuate, it's very important for them to heed that.
All right, just an interesting study, I think also in terms of what we do on a daily basis and also just meteorologists across the country, seeing that information come in, it can be frustrating at times, but it's not always what we're saying.
Right. The messaging is number one. Of course, the data can change. And some people think when they evacuate and they come home and they find that their home really didn't suffer any damage, they see that as, man, I made a mistake. I left.
Right.
But that's a win because you protected yourself. Your home eventually, it looks fine. So that's also a win as well.
No hurricane season is going to be the same. So we'll stay on top of what we can expect throughout this season. In the meantime, more Fox weather. It is on the way for you. We'll be back.
And right now on Fox Weather, a tropical depression arriving on time, really right on time for the official start of the Atlantic hurricane season. We're keeping a close eye on Tropical Depression 2, which is forecast to strengthen into possibly our first named storm of the season within the next few hours.
Yeah, and when and if this does develop into a tropical storm, it'll get that title, that name. It'll be Arlene. Right now, it is not forecast to make a direct hit to the U.S., though it could enhance rounds of showers for Florida. So obviously a lot to break down on this first day of not just the Atlantic hurricane season, but also meteorological summer, where in some areas it is feeling like summer. So a lot to talk about. Hey, everybody, I'm Marissa Torres.
Yeah, and I'm Steve Bender. Thank you for watching Fox Weather. We're going to be talking a lot about the tropics. Before we do, though, yeah, when you were talking about the first day of summer, you look at a wide view of the contiguous 48, and there's a lot of electricity that's happening around the country right now.
There really is, and it's so interesting, too. I was explaining to my 5-year-old what meteorological summer is, and at the end of it, he goes, well, that's confusing. I thought, you know what, you're right. I'm going to keep it simple. But yes, here we are.
Keep it simple. It's going to be hot outside. We're going to be talking about that. Let's talk about what's happening in the Gulf. It's anything but simple because we've watched the evolution of this system and really a lot of organization and important stuff coming from this because of what you're seeing here. This is the hurricane hunters that were on the move earlier today. Fox Weather was there as they took off from Biloxi, Mississippi, to investigate what was going on with Tropical Depression 2. So the hurricane hunters, they're finding tropical characteristics in this storm system, and that is why it's Tropical Depression 2, and it is forecasted to possibly strengthen into a tropical storm. It could be, and if it is, then it would be Arlene later tonight or early tomorrow. Now, it's important to know, even though it's getting more organized, and we are seeing those characteristics, it is not going to make any direct impact to the U.S. It's not anticipated right now or expected. And if anything, it's actually going to move south and weaken. We'll talk about the dynamics at play here. But here's the latest advisory. It came in before 5 p.m. It was really 4:30, but the latest is 35-mile-per-hour winds. Notice the movement. That is what's we're going to be watching for. It's moving to the west-northwest right now. So that's why we have those arrows going this direction. Once it starts to move south, that's when it leaves this favorable environment and starts to get really crushed by the winds from the jet stream. And it's that shear that tears it apart. When we look at the dynamics at play, the buoy is showing us the winds and their direction. So, of course, this one we got 31-mile-per-hour winds. But what I want you to look at here are the wind barbs here, because it's counterclockwise rotation. So we talk about the sea breeze is going to enhance because of the system. It's not making a direct impact, but indirectly, it is going to be feeding some of that. And so what's going to happen here, I'm going to erase all of this, is that onshore flow from the Gulf side is going to accelerate. But notice this, off in the distance, the Atlantic, there is still that onshore flow. So what ends up happening? It's the traffic jam, the merging in central Florida, and that's where you're going to have that enhanced rainfall for the latter half of this week. That's the primary impact out of all of this. Now, we talk about the favorable conditions where it's at right now. You'll notice this is where the center of circulation is. This region right here is medium wind shear. But once it starts to drift to the south and gets towards western Cuba, again, Cuba is actually all the way over here, it's going to enter that high to very high wind shear, and that's what's going to allow this to kind of get disorganized and fall apart through the weekend. But when we look at the surface temperatures, which is the water there in the northern Gulf, they're into the mid to upper 70s or even into the lower 80s. That is enough fuel at the surface to feed this storm, and why we've seen the convection a little more robust on the northern side of this system and why it was able to organize. Again, eventually the track has this pushing back towards the south. You'll see that it kind of peaks on Friday as of this point at 40 miles per hour, and then it starts to fall apart as it goes towards the Pinar del Rio, which is western Cuba. And notice there's really nothing after Sunday morning and afternoon, because at that point, the jet stream is roaring through, and it's really not allowing this to stay organized at any point. point, and you're seeing this kind of fall apart into just a cluster of thunderstorms. Here's the hurricane hunters, though. They're going to continue to fly into this, give us that important data. They got an early morning flight, 6:15. They'll take off. They'll be in the storm from 7 a.m. till 1:30 p.m. They'll follow that with an evening flight, and then they'll have that final flight on Saturday morning as of right now, and we'll continue to get important data. So looking at what's happening here, you can see this is the trajectory, the movement. All those squiggly lines are showing you they make multiple passes through this, trying to find that center of circulation. Marissa, they were